Greetings, Sangha, and welcome to the DJP. Okay, so no long ramble on this one because I haven't released an episode in a bit, and I wanted to hurry and get this one out. And on this episode, my guest is Neil McKinlay. Neil has spent his adult life studying and practicing embodied meditation. Through this span, he has led events of 100 plus people, both in person and online. He's also a parent, a partner, an author, and a competitive swim coach. It's pretty busy. These diverse experiences lend Neil's presentation of meditation a unique flavor. He's well aware of the challenges and opportunities that a full contemporary life poses for the meditation practice, and he speaks to and links the realities of both with candor and freshness. We had a really good conversation about meditation and Buddhist culture in America in general, and some things may or may not have been said which Neil wanted to address before the episode. So before we get it started, here's a quick message from Neil regarding that episode.
Hey everybody. At the beginning of this interview, Justin raises the Shambhala situation. This is an understandable inquiry. I do, after all, mention this community twice in the personal history I offer. Because my engagement with Shambhala ended years ago, however, I mistakenly imagined that I would never be asked to speak to the various claims of sexual misconduct that became public in 2018. As a result, I was not prepared to reply appropriately and actually feel I spoke quite poorly. As I do note, my involvement with the Shambhala community brought me into contact with many wonderful people and was largely conducted far from the center of things. What I failed to acknowledge, however, is that I did occasionally witness some unsettling power dynamics in that context. These were interactions, most of them caught out of the corner of one eye, that gave rise to moments of confusion and uncertainty that, to be honest, I've only been able to recognize in retrospect. Given all this, while the allegations of abuse contained in the 3 Buddhist Project Sunshine reports and then investigated by the law firm of Wickwire Home were new to me, their existence was sadly unsurprising. Having been personally affected by an admittedly different manifestation of troubled power dynamics during my long relationship with the Dharma Ocean community, and having seen these dynamics ultimately end my time there, I believe it's important to speak accurately of one's experience in these situations. I regret that I was not prepared to do so with Justin, and I appreciate the opportunity to remedy this to some small extent here. I aspire to speak with greater precision moving forward. I aspire to let the heartache that I and so many others feel around these events continue to motivate me to offer as much humility, integrity, and respect to the people I work with as I possibly can. Thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoy our conversation.
Well, there you go. You get the idea. So, without further ado, my guest, Neil McKinlay.
You might catch yourself sliding in and out of a hallucinatory state. Just relax and enjoy it. Just relax and enjoy it.
This is an experiment in mind formation. Information. Forming, controlling, operating your mind and your brain. Using digital techniques to overload, scramble, confuse, unfocus your mind. The natural state of the brain is chaos. Chaos is beautiful.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Well, West Coast, so it's a rainy afternoon. How about you?
Gulf Coast. Also going to be a rainy afternoon. For the moment, not so much, but.
Where about are you located, Justin?
I'm in Pensacola.
Ah, okay. Yeah. You are, we're like kind of.
Yeah, like completely opposite sides of the country, yeah.
About as far away as you can get.
Pretty much.
Barring Alaska.
Well, and thankfully we have all this lovely technology now that enables us to do things like this, being so far apart. So.
Yeah, isn't it amazing?
It is amazing. And I think we live in one of the most exciting times possible to be alive. Maybe the most exciting time, just because of the sheer opportunity and possibility that has arisen.
Yeah. It certainly is. There's a lot of wide open expanse, it seems.
Yeah, for sure that. Well, hey man, let's start with a little bit of background. Let's just go ahead and dive right in.
Okay. Well, my name's Neil McKinlay. I live and work in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. And in terms of meditation, I came to meditation. I've been meditating most of my adult life. I came to meditation as a teenager. I was a competitive swimmer. And we went away for a swim meet one weekend. And we went to Vancouver. And I think it was probably a cost-saving measure, but we booked a couple of conference rooms in the hotel, in a hotel, and the girls stayed in one hotel room with a mom chaperoning them, and the boys stayed in another hotel conference room with the relatively new, somewhat weird hippie assistant coach. And on the Saturday night that we were there, I remember it was a rainy, dark, cold Saturday night. The assistant coach taught us all how to meditate, kept us up way too late, sitting on our rolled up sleeping bags, and taught us how to meditate. And something about it was interesting to me. Something about it was compelling. And so I stayed with it. And probably there was a very long period of time where my staying with it basically involved sitting still, closing my eyes, and trying to feel good, not really knowing what I was doing. Right. But that got me to a point where 30 years ago, I started working in the Shambhala community. Then about 20 years ago, I started working in the Dharma Ocean community, where my meditative attention was introduced to the body, introduced to embodied experience. And I began to practice this style of work that I still engage and teach today. And, I don't know why. Maybe it's because of the everyday way that I was introduced to the practice, as a swimmer at a swim meet by a swim coach. But through all of this, there's been a couple of threads that have been constant. One is a sense that meditation both enriches and is enriched by everyday life. That while it's easy to assume that the two are separate, they're not. They actually interpenetrate and influence one another really beautifully. The second thread that has remained constant is this sense that part of our work as practitioners and teachers is to make this link explicit for ourselves, alive for ourselves. And then third, that in order to do this, it requires curiosity and creativity and confidence on our part as practitioners, and a supporting environment that's characterized by things like humility and integrity and respect, which is a set of beliefs that have really been strengthened in the last couple of years with difficult revelations coming out of the first community, the Shambhala community I mentioned, and a difficult end to my relationship with the second, the Dharma Ocean community, which brings me to sitting here with you today.
Oh, well, welcome.
Thank you.
So let's go. I would like to get a functional definition for what you mean exactly by embodied meditation.
Great. So my functional understanding of meditation is meditation involves taking our attention, our wandering attention, that attention that does not seem to want to stay put, and placing it somewhere. And different practices do it in all different kinds of ways. So you can place your attention on a candle, on a piece of scripture, on a visualization, right, on a mantra. With embodied meditation, what we're doing is we're engaging the exact same dynamic where we are, however, placing our attention explicitly in some aspect of embodied experience.
So like mindfulness of breath, mindfulness of body.
Yeah. Mindfulness of breath, mindfulness of body, mindfulness of senses, mindfulness of the earth of which we are part. Yeah.
Right. Right on. Cool. So what was your experience like with Shambhala? I'm actually friends with a Zen monk that has a book that was published by Shambhala Press. And I think he was involved with them, at least in some capacity, for a little while. But I would like to know your experience with Shambhala and what led to the ultimate demise. I mean, I kind of know a little bit about it, but if you would just like elaborate for the people listening, that would be probably helpful.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is to be really clear that, the end of my relationship with the Shambhala community probably dates back to 2004, 2005. And so it predates a lot of the revelations about problematic leadership that have arisen in recent years. Right. And, minus a bumpy conclusion to my stay in that community, my experience was mostly affirming. I met some people who were really supportive and encouraging of me with this work. And the reason I left that community was I wanted to give my attention more to the second community that I mentioned, Dharma Ocean. And so that was really the main cause for my transition. And as I mentioned, that transition happened well before some of the revelations that have been coming out the last couple of years. So unfortunately, or for better or for worse, I don't think I can really offer much commentary in that regard.
That's all right, man. I've seen if you had, I was just wondering if like in your experience, like if you had any experience with any of the problematic things that went on there, but it would seem not. Which is good. It would seem not. And I think probably to some extent I was protected by the fact that I was somewhat at the periphery of the core. My time in Shambhala was marked much more by my relationship with the Victoria Shambhala Center, so the local situation, than it was with the international situation, the international leadership, where it seems like so many of the problems have arisen. Right. You said one thing that I tell people all the time as well, and that's that meditation and daily life are not two things.
Yes.
That they're absolutely synonymous, and the meditation does not stop when you get off the cushion. What's your take on that, though? Like you said it to me, but I tell that to people all the time, and I'm just wondering how you came to that realization and how you carry that out in your daily life.
I think probably one of the more formative experiences that I went through in terms of, to use your terms, coming to that realization is at some point, it was probably in the early to mid 1990s. I did a city retreat with Pema Chodron, CITY, city retreat. And so this is before we had email and the internet and Zoom and streaming and all that kind of stuff. And what this was, I think it was a 6 to 8 week retreat, and Pema Chodron would teach on a Monday night in Berkeley. They'd film it. They'd FedEx the videos off to local communities for Tuesday. And then here in Victoria, we would meet on Wednesday. We would watch the videos. She would give us reading assignments. She would encourage us to practice more than we normally practice. And then we had a couple of retreats, day-long retreats here in Victoria, presumably elsewhere as well, within the context of this bigger city program that she was offering. And I remember just being gobsmacked, Justin, that my life and meditation could entwine in this way. And not just in terms of what I was doing, but, she would encourage us to take the teachings out into our life. So she would highlight a particular teaching and say, well, take a look at this while you're going about doing the dishes. And she would encourage us to take the practice out into our lives as well, saying like, okay, here's the formal practice. Now, do what did she call it? She called it an on-the-spot version of this practice while you're standing in the grocery line. And it was like my mind had exploded. Everything had just opened up in a way that it just felt in my bones so right.
Right. Yeah, a friend of mine actually gave a really good Dharma talk on the Brahma Viharas at the grocery store. It's kind of funny. So, you said earlier, like everybody has like kind of a misconception about meditation. I think when they initially get into it, that like you're just going to be in this blissed out experience, and that seems to be pretty common. Like, and it's been taught to me that if you're meditating with any specific goal in mind, that it's not really meditation. And, you kind of just have to do the thing just to do the thing, kind of like the Zen tea ceremony. You're just making the tea just to make the tea,
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about meditating without any outcome in mind.
Well, so the first thing I think to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is talk about meditation with an outcome in mind,
Sure.
because I think the outcomes really does play an important role. The outcome is what gets us through the door for our very first meditation class,
Right.
workshop, whatever it is. And so that, that desire for an outcome, we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, in my opinion. We just need to hold that outcome very loosely. And I feel like once I, kind of got through the door, my desire for a certain outcome got me through the door. It got me sitting on the cushion. It got me sitting on the cushion on a regular basis. I honestly feel like so much of my path and my journey since that time has been trying to loosen my grip on those ideas so that I can actually settle into what's happening right now. And, it's going on today. This morning when I was practicing, that was one of the things that I was working with, was this desire to have my practice look a certain way, be a certain way. I've got an interview in a few hours. I really need to be focused and stable in this, and just really working to let my hold on that loosen. And maybe that's the work for the rest of our lives. It probably is the work for me for the rest of my life, is sitting down, recognizing the grip, letting that grip loosen, and then settling into what remains.
Right. I think that is the work, right?
Yeah.
Like quite literally that is the work. Like
That's
it's like recognizing all of your bullshit and being like, okay, we might need to address this.
Yeah.
That deep Vipassana insight meditation. Have you done any like Vipassana retreats? Have you ever sat like a Goenka retreat or anything like that?
I've never sat a Goenka. I have been a fairly focused student. I mean, I have been working with this, particular line of teachings and practices for a very long time, given a lot of myself to that, which means, time, energy, and money has been focused in that particular direction. So
yeah,
the answer would be no.
And what lineage, if you had to, I mean, do you do like, are you more of a secular Dharma practitioner, or are you more, or do you follow a particular lineage?
I think it's probably an and. My answer there is probably an and answer, in that I've been deeply impacted and affected by the lineage of Chogyam Trungpa, and it's a very secular, in the world, embracing the broadness of human and life wisdom approach to practice now.
Right. It's kind of like a boots on the ground Dharma.
Yeah. So deeply influenced by the lineage of Chogyam Trungpa and all its various manifestations, and now focused on a boots on the ground Dharma.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of what I work on. I'm actually in facilitator training right now myself. So, or it's about to start in January. I've been doing this. We did like a Buddhist study series thing, and then like a living the Dharma thing. I've been meditating for, several years, like probably like a consistent practice for, 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
But really more seriously over the past 2 or 3 years. And, I just kind of decided to start pursuing that as a career path. So, but I actually started meditation facilitator training in January through a meditation center in Nashville, Wild Heart Meditation Center. So they were a branch of, they used to be part of Against the Stream, but then they kind of broke off from Against the Stream. And yeah.
Oh, interesting.
If you're familiar with that, but
I'm only familiar in the most general possible way.
Right. That's fine. Most people aren't even that familiar. Like I can say that to some people, I have no idea what you're talking about, man. So what's your practice look like these days? I mean, I'm sure you sit regularly, but like what's your daily practice like?
I practice. Yeah, I do practice regularly. I mean, it's a rare day that I don't practice. A typical practice is about 45 minutes in length. With the embodied meditation I do, that there can often be a laying down component and a sitting up component. The laying down component is really helps me relax and helps me begin to settle into embodied experience, which I then bring into the upright position. And typically I split it half and half. So if I'm doing 45 minutes, it's about 20 minutes lying down, 20 minutes sitting up with, the 5-minute transition phase. If I find myself incredibly unsettled if my mind is really unstable, which honestly has really been a very common experience the last 2 years. It's been a difficult couple of years, as many of us obviously know. I'll spend more time laying down. And then later on in the day, it's not uncommon as I'm moving toward the conclusion of the day, if I feel like there is something that wants a little bit more space in my life, a little bit more room for a feeling, for an insight, for an experience, I'll do a really short practice at the end of the day, maybe 5 minutes, just to let my mental clutter kind of subside and give the experience a chance to live and breathe, so to speak.
Right on. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important too, that having the morning and the evening practice, I think, like definitely in the morning to, kind of collect yourself and just set the tone for the day. And then, just like you said, the evening practice to kind of unpack the day, like, okay, I can put all this to bed now and kind of let everything rest. Cause, I interviewed a hypnotherapist, and it was explained to me that like the first 30 minutes of the day and the last 30 minutes of the day before you go to sleep, you're kind of almost in a trance state. So you're very susceptible to, whatever stimuli is being put in your direction. So it would only make sense to meditate during those times, during that 30-minute period in the morning and in the evening, It would seem almost counterintuitive to not do that. I mean, especially for everyone, but, especially anybody that actually has any kind of a dedicated meditation practice, and, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, it's been a small game changer to introduce that short second practice. And I'd always felt what you're pointing to. I always felt intuitively that having the two practices in a day would be of some kind of benefit. But I always had this idea that, okay, if I meditate 45 minutes in the morning, I also have to meditate 45 minutes in the evening. And, I have home and family and life responsibilities. And so that kept being a roadblock. And it was really liberating to realize, well, no one's actually saying it needs to be 45 minutes, Neil. Right. And so 5 minutes, sometimes even just 2 minutes, it makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, you obviously lead guided meditations, right?
Yeah.
You want to do just a quick, 2 or 5 minute little check-in,
yeah, let's do that.
Sit right now for, I think it would be beneficial for me and probably you and everybody listening. So why not?
Great. Thanks for that invite. Sure. So let's just take a moment here and just sit quietly. Just give ourselves a moment for our mind and our body to settle just a little. And then feel whatever contact you have with the earth, which is going to be the seat underneath us, whether we're in a chair or a cushion or a bench. Just feel how our seat, how our feet, how our legs are touching the earth. Just surrender into that. And let your spine gently elongate out of this sense of grounding. So it's almost like the energy of the earth helps us lengthen the spine through the crown of the head. And then just very gently let the body move from left to right, so gently that probably someone on the outside wouldn't notice it. And when you find a kind of sweet spot, a spot that's not quite left, not quite right, where the body just relaxes, just settle there and let gravity flow through the body. And then do the same front to back. Feel for that sweet spot. Settle in. Let gravity just flow down through you into the earth. And then let's just let our attention rest on the aspect of embodied experience we consider the personal body. Just our sense of apparently bounded bodiness. Just let your attention recline and luxuriate in this. And when attention wanders, just gently come back to this. And then as we come to the end of this very short practice, just let any sense of efforting release, loosen. Settle into what remains when that efforting dissolves. And just come back to the beginning and just sit quietly for a moment. And there we go.
Perfect. Just
Great.
what I needed. Just what I needed.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no, thank you, man. Thank you. So we've talked a lot about meditation, and if we're talking about the Dharma, the samadhi aspect of the Eightfold Path is only one of three aspects of that path. You've got your wisdom, your ethical, and then your meditation basically is the way that the Eightfold Path breaks down. So, and I'm really a really big proponent of really pushing the sila aspect of the path, because I think that it's really overlooked, especially in today's McMindfulness craze. So that being said, what are your views on the attention being so drastically focused on meditation and mindfulness without really focusing on the other aspects of the Eightfold Path?
I can get really specific about that.
Great.
I think the mindfulness movement, anything that gets us talking about mindfulness more and practicing mindfulness, I'm using that language deliberately here, practicing that mindfulness more, both formally and in our lives, I am all on board for, so there's a lot of celebration about that. And at the same time, I think as you're pointing to this in this direction, sometimes, not all the time, I need to be really clear that not all the time, but sometimes I feel like the way that meditation is presented within the mindfulness movement is overly limited. So when I said I want to get specific about that, what do I mean? Well, one of the things that I rarely hear spoken of, and again, this is not a blanket statement because I know there are some very well-trained people who do speak to this, but one of the things that I often don't hear spoken of in my exposure to the mindfulness movement is what you talked about a few minutes ago, just good old Vipassana. The fact that if you stabilize in your life experience mindfulness, it's inevitable that that Vipassana experience is going to arise. Out of that stability, we have insight. And when this isn't addressed, it can be really confusing for people. Why am I suddenly so sad? Why do I suddenly feel like my body has no boundaries? Why is this memory from when I was 3 years old coming up? And without that aspect of the practice being talked about and acknowledged, people aren't really given the infrastructure to meet it and work with it appropriately. So it becomes confusing, it becomes frustrating. People maybe feel like they're doing it wrong, and so they stop meditating, which undoes the good of the movement in the first place. And that's just a specific example because, of course, the teachings. So now we're talking about the teaching aspect, the teachings that exist around meditation, specifically the Buddhist teachings, because those are what I'm familiar with. They offer a lot of support for all of that. And so being familiar with that aspect of the path is really helpful. It's just helpful, beginning, middle, and end, helpful. And so, I feel like there's a tremendous service being done by a lot of the presentation of meditation that I'm exposed to under the mindfulness umbrella. And there's some disservice being done because those other aspects of the path that you just touched upon, aren't being acknowledged as much as they might be.
Right. Yeah. And one thing I've really noticed about really following the rest of the Eightfold Path, really trying to exemplify, wise view or right view and right action, right effort, right livelihood, is that by exercising that through my daily life and really trying to apply those precepts to my life, that when I am deep in Vipassana meditation, that's when all that guilt and shame and all that other shit come up from the other stuff that you've done that were outside of the scope of the precepts of the path. So if you stray from the path, it's going to make your meditation practice a lot more painful.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's true.
Yeah. That's just been my experience. It's like, wow, I should really, really start working on these other aspects of the Eightfold Path. And I think the insight meditation can really show you, first of all, it kind of helps you stop doing some of the other stuff, because for sure that's when all that stuff's going to come up, is when you're sitting, when you slow the brain down, that's when all the ick comes up. But what it also does for me is it kind of points out my pre-existing ick, so it helps me work on just being a better person. Because it's insight meditation, and it does really nothing but a lot of self-introspection.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this great, probably the best teaching I've ever received about meditation, period, is the Tibetan word for meditation, which is GOM, G-O-M. And it simply means to become familiar with. And I love that, because it gets back to what you were talking about, meditation without, the kind of agendas we typically bring into the practice. Right. But it just is so clear and so understandable for me. And it really helps me translate this work into my everyday life, because, okay, so I'm sitting down, I'm becoming familiar with my wild mind. Okay. Well, let's just stop there. Just becoming aware of that, familiar with that, can be so helpful. So, I go into a meeting at work and my mind's all over the place. I think it's a world-changing revelation to be able to see, as a result of my meditation practice, okay, my mind is all over the place. I have a wild mind. I have a hard time settling. And, maybe we refrain from speaking a little bit at the beginning of the meeting until we settle down, make some sort of adaptation based upon what we've become familiar with. So, yeah, I think that a really full understanding of what it is we're doing here is tremendously helpful out in my everyday life. And you used the word ick. It helps us minimize the ick. I use the word yucky. So it helps us minimize the yuckiness, reduce the yuckiness.
Right. Hey, if I can reduce the yuckiness by 10%, I'm in.
I think I'd consider that a win. Going back to Pema Chodron, who I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I've heard her say again and again is, just try to be present for 1/10 of a second. And I'm like, I'm on board with that. I can work with that bar. And so to reduce the yuckiness by 10%, by 1/10 of a percent, great.
Yeah, sign me up. Sign me up.
Sign me up.
Any reduction whatsoever. Put my name on the list immediately. So, do you know anything about the actual science behind meditation, like nervous system science or anything of that nature?
Honestly, my brain simply doesn't seem to work that way. I have a lot of good friends. I actually, for years, I co-led a retreat with someone who's very familiar with the science of meditation. And, he would give a talk where he was talking about the science and left brain, right brain, neuroplasticity and all that stuff. And people would respond. And I'd be like, yeah, I need to get more on board with this. My brain simply doesn't work that way, it seems. It just goes in. I mean, I guess it goes in one ear and out the other. So for better, for worse.
Yeah. I mean, I've read a bit on it, but not enough to say that I'm an authority on science behind meditation. Like, no, not at all. Not at all. But all I know is what it's done for me, and what I've seen it do for friends that, and it's been life-changing.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly.
And that actually, but the science does get back to what we were talking about with mindfulness and what we were talking about with ickiness and yuckiness. Science is another way of talking about all this stuff in a way that makes sense to people. And I'm all for finding as many different languages for meditation as we can so that we're speaking to more and more people in ways that really resonate for them, whether it's mindfulness, ickiness, yuckiness, or science. Yeah, I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I think it's to make it in as many different languages as possible so that we can reach as many people as possible. Because, like we were just talking about, the benefits are just they're so exponential.
Yeah.
It's astonishing what even just if you were to take 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes at night, and literally just 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes at night, and really commit yourself to that practice. It's amazing the way that your life will change around that practice.
Well, I had this interesting experience years ago where someone called me up and they asked me if I would teach a group of people at their workplace how to meditate. So I said, okay, well, what would we be doing? And they said, well, it would be a lunchtime sort of thing. It would be like a brown bag sort of lunchtime workshop. And I said, great. So we'll have an hour. And they said, well, people are going to show up late and people are going to, leave early and they need a little time to eat. So maybe you'll have about 40 minutes. And I said, okay, we're going to teach meditation in 40 minutes. So I think we can do that. And they said, and you need to teach them in a chair because that's how people work, or, at a desk. I'm like, okay, well, 40 minutes at a desk. I think we can do that. And then they said, and I know you like to talk about meditating for like 40, 45 minutes. Like, don't do that. I'm like, okay, got all the parameters. Let's do it. And so we did this, it was a 35-minute workshop in the end in which I gave people a very short practice, 5 minutes, that could be done at their desk. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. I'd be curious to see if anything comes of this. And then a couple of years later, I ran into one of the women who had taken that workshop. And I asked her, I said, well, okay, how was that? And she said, well, the workshop was great. What was even better was what happened afterwards. And I said, well, what happened afterwards? She said, I just started meditating 5 minutes a day, Monday through Friday, at my desk at lunchtime. The lunchtime whistle goes, everyone leaves. I sit there at my desk for 5 minutes. I meditate, and then I go off and do my thing. And I asked her point blank, I said, did you see any benefit? Do you feel like this affected in your life? And she goes, yes, there was a total shift. I just felt like I was refreshed and renewed and regrounded in whatever the basis of my life is by doing that practice in the middle of my workday, and then refreshed day after day after day by doing it 5 days a week. And then, the weekend's busy. I can't do it on the weekend. I've got too many family commitments. But by Sunday, I'm going to bed, looking forward to going to work so I can meditate again. And I thought, it was just a brilliant and moving testimonial to, it really doesn't take much. 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week.
Yeah, that's minuscule. I mean, how much time do people spend just scrolling mindlessly on their phones a day?
Yes.
Definitely probably more than 5 minutes. I'm just gonna throw that out there. Probably a little bit more than 5 minutes. I know I scroll for more than 5, just mindlessly, not even just completely programmed to do so at this point. And
yes.
I'm thinking about getting a flip phone just to stop that and cut that out of my life. It's like, I think I just need to limit my internet to the actual computer and let that be it. I just don't see any reason to carry it around in my pocket.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy adaptation. The other thing that I do in that regard, and I need to be clear, I'm not very good at this, but I try to use those moments of impulsive reaching for the phone or impulsive reaching, going to the computer, that occasionally I try to catch that impulse and just pause. We are talking about it doesn't take much to have an impact. I just try and pause for 30 seconds and just practice for 30 seconds. And then, maybe I'm going to go on Instagram, maybe I'm not, I don't know. But that pause makes such a difference, just a short moment of coming back. And actually, it means that I'm actually meditating a little bit more in my life than I would be otherwise. So I've started to try and use that impulse that we all are so familiar with to some sort of advantage in my practice and my life.
Yeah, Claude Anshin-Thomas calls that a bell of mindfulness.
Yes, that's actually where the idea came from. I know that in Plum Village, Thich Nhat Hanh's community, they will ring the bell at random points in the day to just kind of bring everyone back. And I was thinking, oh, that's such a great idea. I wish I had a bell in my life. And then I thought, well, what about the computer? So that's kind of become my computer or my online bell.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And I did that for a long time, and I recently just turned my notifications off. I would use the notifications as my bell of mindfulness. Stoplights are a big one for me. I'll use stoplights and just kind of take that moment while I'm at the stoplight to just kind of reconnect,
Yeah.
Kind of mellow out for a minute and bring it all back home. To quote the great Bob Dylan. But yeah, man, meditation has just been such it has so much utility in my life, and I've seen it have so much utility in other people's lives. So I just can't, shut up about it. Basically, like I'm always telling people, they're like, oh, well, this is going on in my life and this is going on. And my response is always, do you meditate? I'm sure people are getting really sick and tired of hearing this shit by now, but hey, it's probably not going to change. So get used to it.
Well, it's one of the things that I enjoy most about my life or my work is finding ways to make that link for people, finding ways to help people understand or see or get an inkling of how meditation might actually be of some sort of benefit. And one of the things that I often talk about stub toes. I talk about stub toes in grocery stores. I've already acknowledged the grocery store a little bit, but I often talk about stub toe. We all stub our toes. We all know what it's like to stub our toes. It really hurts. It's painful. And then what we all tend to do, if people are anything like me, is we add to that. We add drama to that experience. So we stub our toe, it's painful. And then it's like, why does this always happen to me? I don't have time for this. Bad things are always going on in my life. It's probably broken and I'm not going to be able to do anything for the next 6 weeks, on and on and on and on and on. And all those addings, they're not particularly helpful. They actually add to the suffering, or to use our brilliant phrases, the ickiness and the yuckiness of the situation. And what meditation does is it gives us a tool to help us disentangle ourselves from what we're adding, all the drama, the stories we're telling ourselves, and come back to the immediate experience. Now, the immediate experience, because we've just stubbed our toes, is going to be painful. It's going to be uncomfortable. Like meditation doesn't suddenly mean that our dishes are washed and our bills are paid. So we come back to this painful stubbed toe situation, but without all the commentary overwhelming us, what happens is we have a chance to touch into these basic human qualities like clarity. We can see situations for what they are. So rather than complaining, we realize we need to run our toe under cold water. We realize that it's swelling so badly, we probably should go to emergency and get it checked out. We realize that we can't drive. There are these basic human qualities, clarity being one of them, that we begin to access through the practice in our everyday life that are so much more helpful than the add-ons that we do, the suffering, the ickiness, and the yuckiness that we engage in. And I love making those links for people.
Yeah. Dave Smith calls that the wound that seeks the arrow. It's from the old Polly Cannon story, the two darts. Yeah. It's like, yeah, you already got one dart. Now you're going to create all this unneeded suffering around it and take that second arrow. So I'm good on that.
Basically loosening the hold on the second arrow and coming back to the first and, seeing what, if anything, needs to happen there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it already sucks to have a stub toe. Why make it worse?
Well,
that can apply to any situation, really. It's like if you're in a shitty situation, like it already sucks. Like, all the papancha, that mental proliferation surrounding it, it's gonna eat you alive.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And it's so strange the way that the brain does that, like the way that we are programmed to do that almost. It's like we have to, but fortunately anything that can be programmed can be, deleted and reprogrammed, right? It's where that neuroplasticity fault comes in.
Well, and that's I think the other thing that's really wonderful. One of the other things that's really wonderful about this work for me is again coming back to that Tibetan term gom, to become familiar with. One of the things that happens for me by becoming familiar with how much I add to the experience of a stubbed toe, how miserable it makes me, how not helpful it is in my life, and how hard it is for me to find my way out of that maelstrom back to the experience of the stubbed toe. One of the things that comes out of that familiarity, because it does seem to be a human capacity, we all seem to do it, is a tremendous amount of empathy and sympathy and compassion for all of us. We all go through this. That's why I love the stub toe example. It's because we all know it. We all go through this. And if you're anything like me, you go through it all day long, which really kind of opens my heart to, people that I see in the grocery store or walking on the street or, people who walk through the door into a class that I'm offering. It's like, oh yeah, we're in this together. We all have this very, very painful tendency to add a second arrow.
Yeah, we do. And that's interesting. You said that term is gom.
Gom, Gom.
Okay, and you said that's a Tibetan term.
Yeah, it's the Tibetan term for meditation.
Right on. Yeah, and that's interesting. And the Pali term, they didn't actually have a word for meditation in Pali. There was a word. It was a bhavana. It was farmer culture. So everything, everything's based around farm culture in the early Dharma. And it means cultivation. So they would use this word bhavana. It's like they said they didn't actually have a word for meditation, but it's the cultivation of mind states. So you plant the seeds of, metta and you grow metta from that. You cultivate metta from that.
Oh, how beautiful.
Yeah.
I also like one of the things I like about that image is that it takes time.
Yeah. Right? It's nothing that happens overnight.
No, you plant the seed and it doesn't mean that your watermelon has flourished the next morning. It's going to take some time. I really like that.
And it's going to take some care and some watering,
Yeah.
You're going to have to pay attention to it. You're going to have to love it a little bit. You can't just plant the seed and walk away. That's not going to work.
Well, that's interesting because both, so cultivating and becoming familiar with, they're both verbs. They're both things that we need to do. There's something being asked of us here, which I think is really communicative.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the connection there. That's great, man. I just get lost in the Dharma sometimes. I'm such a nerd about it. I'll sit and read suttas for hours whenever I have time, which I don't normally have time. But if I do find time, I find myself doing that a lot. Sitting at a coffee shop, just reading Buddhist texts. People probably think I'm a weirdo. And they're not wrong.
Someone once came into a meeting with me and said, I have a question for you. And I said, okay. And they said, I'm asking you this question because you seem to be a bit of a meditation geek. And I was simultaneously horrified to be seen so clearly and a little bit kind of pleased with the whole recognition, right? Because I seem to be a bit of a meditation geek.
You're like, oh, I'm exposed, but that is what I am. So yes.
Yep.
Awesome, man. I noticed you have a podcast too, the Bringing Meditation to Life podcast.
Yeah. Bringing Meditation to Life. It's in the first episode, I describe it as kind of entries from my meditator's notebook. We're hitting the meditation geek aspect of my being.
Perfect.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about meditation, reflecting upon the teachings, reflecting upon how they interface with my everyday life. And this is a place for me to share these reflections. The entries tend to be really short. Episodes are 5 to 10 minutes in length. Sometimes I talk about something that leads with, kind of an obvious subject for meditation. For instance, there's an episode entitled Working with Instructions, where I talk about, what might our relationship be with the instructions we receive around practice. And then other times it's more out in the world. So you mentioned the wonderful Bob Dylan the other day, and I've got an episode that I'm probably going to be posting. I am going to be posting later this week, entitled Dylan, Sinatra, and Keeping It Fresh. And it's basically a very short reflection on how it's important to have models for longevity in this work. And the models, in my opinion, don't need to be meditators or Buddhist people or spiritual people, particularly. Anyone who sticks with something over a period of time can teach us something about how we might keep it fresh. And so I talk a very little bit about, the recent career of Bob Dylan and how he's drawn upon the Frank Sinatra songbook to, in my opinion, reinvigorate his singing voice. So that's bringing meditation to life, is taking pages from my meditator's notebook and sharing them partially, I think, to educate maybe, but mostly to inspire people to make the same links in their world, in their life.
Right on. Awesome, man. Well, hopefully it does.
I hope so too.
Hopefully it inspires some people.
Yeah, I hope
that's the intention.
That's the intention, to blur the distinction between meditation and everyday life a little bit. So hopefully it encourages a few people to pick up an eraser and walk around and dull a few of the lines that we draw around those two aspects of our human lives.
Sweet. Yeah, hopefully so. That's what I'm trying to do. Basically the same thing, just in a different way.
Still using the podcast, though. Still using the means of a podcast.
Still using the podcast, for sure. And I'm still putting the same message out pretty much.
And a very communicative title in that regard, I must say. Dharma Junkie.
Yeah,
captures it.
Well, yeah, it's because I am a huge Dharma junkie, and I'm also a recovering addict. So, kind of went hand in hand.
Yeah.
It was like my junkie life shifted from, junkie stuff to being a Dharma junkie. So it seemed just kind of intuitive. Like, yeah, that's what I'll call the podcast for sure.
Yeah. It's a great name.
Awesome. Yeah. I thought so. Thank you though. So where can people find you at, man?
Well, I exist in all the usual places: Facebook, Instagram, Insight Timer. The podcast that we talk about is on my website, which I'll mention in a sec, but also on Apple and Spotify. The main way, though, is my website. And I have an unusual spelling for my last name, though it just seems normal to me. My website is neilmckinlay.com, and my last name is McKinlay. Most McKinleys are Ley. I'm an Lay. And you can find everything there, guided meditations, writing on meditation and everyday life, the podcast that we just talked about. One of the things that I'm most excited about is this online gathering community, which is a monthly subscription community where we come together 3 times a week by Zoom. We've got this growing archive of recordings, these conversations we have with one another, and it's all focused on what we've been touching on over and over again, which is how do we bring meditation and everyday life together? How do we pick up the eraser and blur those distinctions? What do these teachings mean in our 21st century lives? How do they manifest?
Yeah. That's valuable information to have and valuable information to be putting out there. And I just want to let you know my gratitude for what you're doing, just in service to the world, basically, because that's what I view it as. By teaching people to be more in the moment and just more mindful of the way that they carry themselves in the world. One person at a time, that's how we make a difference. We can try to do these big social movements, and that's great, but I think it really comes down to the individual, and it's the individual responsibility, because, it's like the Buddha said, it's like a pebble being dropped in a still pond. It all ripples outward. So it's whatever you're putting out. And I think meditation could really help put out a lot of positive energy. So like I
Yeah.
said, thank you for what you're doing, man. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. And it's true. I mean, it sounds a little bit hokey sometimes, but it's just an effort to very slightly reduce the suffering that we experience in this world, to use traditional language, and then to see how those ripples from those little pebbles dropping in the pond of our lives, how those ripples, reach out and touch other people.
Yeah, for sure. Well, hey, man, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. We'll have to stay in touch and do it again sometime.
Thank you very much. Take care. And thank you for doing this podcast.
Big thanks again to Neil for being on the show. If you would like to get in touch with him, he can be found at neilmckinlay.com. And that's McKinlay with an A. As always, thank you for listening. If you like the show, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And if you wish to contribute to keep the show going, you can send money to @DharmaJunkie at Venmo or $DharmaJunkie at Cash App. Again, thank you for listening. I appreciate all of you. Namaste.